It was a wedding no one would forget, but not for the reasons anyone expected. The ballroom was dripping in opulence, white roses cascading from golden vases, the air filled with the scent of money and power. Among the sea of smiling faces, laughter, and champagne glasses clinking, one guest's entrance turned the celebration into a storm. He saw her as soon as she walked in. Danielle, the ex he hadn't spoken to in years, the woman who had loved him before he became the CEO. She wasn't supposed to come. The invitation was meant to humiliate her, to show her how far beneath him she now stood. Yet there she was, standing tall and regal in a deep emerald gown, her skin glowing, her expression unreadable. But it wasn't her presence that sent a chill down his spine. It was the man walking beside her, the man he never thought he'd see again, the one person who could unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. Marcus, his rival, the man who had been waiting for a moment like this. Jason Freeman wasn't always the polished and celebrated CEO of Freeman and Grant Investments. Years ago, he was just a scrappy kid trying to prove himself, with Danielle always at his side. She supported him, worked overtime shifts as a nurse to help him through his MBA, and believed in him when no one else did. But once Jason reached the top, Danielle became a reminder of the man he used to be when he wanted to forget. Their breakup had been cold, swift, and brutal. Jason had claimed they wanted different things, but the truth was simpler. Danielle didn't fit into his shiny new world. She wasn't the right look for a CEO's wife, at least not in Jason's eyes. So when Jason sent her an invitation to his wedding, a clear, gleaming message of how far he had moved on, he pictured her receiving it with tears in her eyes, maybe a little bitterness. He certainly didn't expect her to RSVP, and he definitely didn't expect her to walk in with Marcus Allen. The tension in the room was palpable as Danielle and Marcus made their way through the crowd. Marcus wasn't just Jason's rival. He was the man who had outsmarted him at every turn for years, snatching deals and clients Jason thought were in the bag. Jason's bride, Emily, leaned in close, her youthful face tight with confusion. "Who is she?" she whispered. "An old friend," Jason lied, his jaw tightening. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Marcus, who smirked at him like a cat who had cornered a mouse. When Danielle and Marcus reached a couple, Jason forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Danielle, I didn't expect you to come." Danielle returned his smile, but hers was calm, almost serene. "Why wouldn't I? You invited me." Jason's gaze flicked to Marcus. "And him?" "Marcus," Danielle said lightly, slipping her arm through Marcus's. "He's my date." As the evening unfolded, Jason found it impossible to enjoy his own wedding. Danielle was stunning, commanding attention without even trying. Marcus, on the other hand, was charming everyone in the room, turning heads and collecting compliments like they were his birthright. But what rattled Jason most was how comfortable they seemed together. Danielle laughed at Marcus's jokes, leaned into his whispers, and touched his arm in ways that felt far too intimate. It wasn't just revenge, it was power. Jason couldn't focus on his bride, who was beginning to notice his distraction. When Marcus approached the bar, Jason seized his chance, slipping away from Emily's side to confront him. "What are you doing here?" Jason hissed, his mask of calm finally slipping. Marcus sipped his whiskey, his expression smug. "I came to support my girlfriend." Jason flinched. The word girlfriend hit harder than he expected. "You don't care about her. You're just using her to get to me." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm showing her what it's like to be with a man who sees her worth." Jason clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Danielle appeared, her eyes cool and steady. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Jason turned to her, searching for some trace of the woman he used to know, the one who adored him unconditionally. But she wasn't there. Danielle had moved on more than he ever expected, more than he thought she deserved. And as she stood there, her hand resting lightly on Marcus's arm, Jason realized the truth. He hadn't won. He had lost. Not just her love, but her respect, her faith in him, everything that mattered. The night ended in a haze for Jason. The guests whispered, the smiles turned into smirks, and even Emily's patience wore thin. As Jason watched Danielle and Marcus leave the ballroom, arm in arm, a deep sense of regret clawed at him. If you believe in the power of stories to heal, to teach, and to inspire, this is your place. Subscribe now and be part of a community that sees beyond the headlines into the lives that shape them. Together, we'll explore stories that truly matter. He had built an empire, married a woman society deemed perfect, and yet he felt empty, because in his quest for power and status, he had underestimated the quiet strength of the woman he left behind and the quiet revenge she would deliver by simply showing him how much better off she was without him. The wedding was over, but the damage was permanent. Danielle had won, not with spite or malice, but with grace and dignity. And Jason would spend the rest of his life haunted by the moment she walked away with his greatest enemy and left him behind in every way that mattered. Jason stood by the ornate window of the hotel ballroom, his eyes following Danielle and Marcus as they disappeared into the night. The hollow ache in his chest deepened with every passing second. The air around him seemed heavier, suffocating, even, and for the first time in years, Jason Freeman, the man who had everything, felt small. Behind him, Emily's voice snapped him back to reality. "Jason," she called, her tone sharp. "What was that all about? Who is she?" Jason turned slowly, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. Emily looked stunning in her wedding dress, the picture-perfect bride. But in that moment, Jason couldn't feel the joy he was supposed to. Instead, he felt resentment toward her, toward himself, toward everything he thought he wanted. "She's no one," Jason lied, his voice strained. "No one?" Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. "Because it sure seemed like someone. You barely looked at me tonight. All your attention was on them." Jason sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He couldn't tell Emily the truth, not about Danielle, not about Marcus, not about the gnawing regret eating away at him. "It's complicated," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Emily wasn't satisfied. "You know what? I don't care who she is. What I care about is why my husband on our wedding day looks like he's just been punched in the gut." Her voice cracked slightly, her frustration giving way to hurt. "Do you even want to be here, Jason? Or are you still chasing ghosts?" Jason opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? That she was right? That the ghost of Danielle and everything she represented was haunting him in ways he never imagined? Instead, he said nothing. Meanwhile, outside the ballroom, Danielle and Marcus walked hand in hand toward the valet station. The night air was crisp, the city lights reflecting in Danielle's eyes. She felt lighter than she had in years, as though she had finally let go of a burden she didn't even realize she was carrying. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his deep voice breaking the silence. Danielle nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm more than okay." Marcus studied her for a moment, his usual playful demeanor replaced by quiet sincerity. "You know, you didn't have to come tonight. I would have understood if you didn't want to." Danielle stopped walking, turning to face him. "I needed to," she said simply. "Not for him. For me." Marcus nodded, his hand tightening around hers. He admired her strength, her poise, the way she had faced Jason with her head held high. Danielle was unlike anyone he had ever met, and tonight only reinforced what he already knew: she was remarkable. "I'm glad you did," Marcus said softly, "but I'm even more glad you're walking away from it all." From him. Danielle's smile widened, and for the first time in a long time, it reached her eyes. "So am I back inside?" Jason was left alone. Emily had stormed off, frustrated and humiliated by his silence. The guests were thinning out, the laughter and chatter fading into echoes. Jason stood by the bar, nursing a glass of scotch that did little to dull the pain. He replayed the evening in his mind, the moment Danielle walked in, the look in her eyes, the confidence in her stride. She was no longer the woman he had left behind, the one who begged for answers he wouldn't give. She was stronger, brighter, and unapologetically herself. And Marcus. Jason's jaw tightened at the thought of him. Marcus had everything Jason had once wanted: power, influence, respect. But tonight, it wasn't the business deals or the rivalries that mattered. Tonight, Marcus had something Jason could never get back: Danielle's trust, her love, her loyalty. Jason drained his glass, the burn of the alcohol doing nothing to soothe the ache inside him. For years, he had told himself that leaving Danielle was the right choice, that she wasn't enough for the life he wanted. But now, watching her thrive without him, he realized the painful truth. He was the one who wasn't enough. As the last of the guests trickled out and the ballroom staff began cleaning up, Jason stood in the empty room, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of his life. But it wasn't happiness he felt, it was regret. Because in trying to build a perfect life, Jason had destroyed the only part of it that had ever been real. And now, he was left with nothing but memories and the haunting image of Danielle walking away with the man who had bested him in every way that mattered. Jason Freeman, the celebrated CEO, was no longer at the top. He was just another man who let the best thing in his life slip through his fingers. Jason stayed behind in the ballroom long after the staff had finished cleaning up. The grand chandeliers above him glittered coldly, mocking him. He couldn't stop replaying every moment of the night: Danielle's calm, Marcus's smirk, and the way the room seemed to shift when they walked in together. His phone buzzed on the table in front of him, pulling him from his thoughts. A text from Emily. "I'm going to stay at my parents' tonight. Call me when you figure out what you really want." Jason sighed heavily, tossing the phone aside. Emily wasn't wrong to leave. She deserved better than a man who couldn't even focus on his wedding day. But the truth was, he didn't know what he wanted anymore. Or maybe he did, and it was too late to admit it. He poured another drink, staring into the amber liquid as if it held the answers. The voice he had been avoiding all night crept into his mind, whispering the question he had refused to face for years. Why did you let her go? Across the city, Danielle and Marcus sat in a quiet jazz lounge, the soft hum of saxophones filling the air. Danielle swirled her wine, her gaze distant but peaceful. The night had gone better than she expected. She felt closure, a rare and precious thing. But it wasn't just about Jason. It was about reclaiming her power, her worth, her story. "You've been quiet," Marcus said, watching her carefully. Danielle smiled softly, setting her glass down. "I'm just thinking. Good thoughts, I hope." She nodded. "For the first time in a long time, yeah." Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch was steady, grounding. "You deserve this, you know. Peace, happiness, all of it." Danielle met his gaze, her smile growing warmer. "Thank you for being there tonight." "For everything." He shrugged, though his grin was playful. "What can I say? I'm a sucker for a dramatic entrance." She laughed, a light, genuine sound that filled the space between them. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the kind that clings desperately to the past, but the kind that looks boldly toward the future. Jason didn't leave the ballroom until the early hours of the morning. The streets were quiet as he walked back to the penthouse suite he had rented for the night. Emily's things were gone, her gown draped carefully over a chair, her shoes missing from the spot where she had kicked them off. He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. The silence was deafening. For years, Jason had built his life around image, wealth, and power, believing they would fill the void inside him. But tonight, standing face to face with Danielle, he realized how wrong he had been. He had traded love for ambition, compassion for ego, and connection for status. And in the end, he was left with nothing but a hollow empire. Jason reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found her name. Danielle. His thumb hovered over the call button. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to tell her everything he had kept bottled up for years. But as he stared at her name, he knew the truth. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about him. Danielle didn't need his apology. She didn't need his explanations or his guilt. She had moved on beautifully, powerfully, and completely. And Jason had no right to drag her back into the mess he had created. He set the phone down, the weight of his regrets pressing heavier than ever. Weeks passed, and Jason buried himself in work, trying to distract himself from the lingering ache in his chest. He threw himself into meetings, deals, and late nights. At the office, hoping to forget the way Danielle had looked at him that night with nothing but indifference. But one day, as he sat alone in his corner office, a knock at the door startled him. His assistant peeked in holding a small envelope. "This came for you," she said, placing it on his desk before leaving. Jason frowned, picking it up. There was no return address, just his name written in neat, familiar handwriting. He opened it carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The note was brief, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. "Jason, thank you for reminding me of who I am. I hope you find the same for yourself someday. Take care, Danielle." Jason stared at the words, his chest tightening. It wasn't forgiveness. Not exactly. It wasn't reconciliation or an invitation to reconnect. It was closure, the kind he hadn't earned but desperately needed. As he folded the note and slipped it into his desk drawer, Jason felt something shift inside him. He couldn't undo the past, and he couldn't win Danielle back. But maybe, just maybe, he could start figuring out who he was without the fod he had spent so many years building. For the first time in his life, Jason Freeman felt the stirrings of something he had never truly embraced: humility. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for a man like him, that was everything. Jason Freeman's life slowed down in ways he hadn't anticipated. The once unrelenting drive to outshine everyone faded as he found himself grappling with questions he'd never dared to ask before. Who was he beyond the titles, beyond the money, beyond the facade? He had no answer yet, but Danielle's note sat tucked in his drawer as a quiet reminder to keep searching. Months turned into a year. Jason rarely thought about Marcus or the wedding anymore, but Danielle's words still lingered. They weren't haunting, they were grounding. He had started therapy, an idea that would have mortified the old Jason. It was uncomfortable at first, peeling back the layers of himself he had spent decades perfecting. But with every session, he began to understand the choices that led him here. The boy who had grown up with nothing had been desperate to prove his worth, to show the world and himself that he was more than what they expected. But in chasing validation, he'd lost sight of the parts of him that mattered most. Therapy didn't offer quick fixes, but it gave him clarity. Danielle, meanwhile, was thriving. Her relationship with Marcus deepened as they built something meaningful together. He supported her in ways Jason never had, not just emotionally, but as an equal partner. Danielle felt more alive, more confident, more herself than ever before. She had started a nonprofit focused on supporting underrepresented women in business, using her experiences to inspire others. The work was fulfilling, and it reminded her daily of the strength she had found within herself. Marcus often joked that she had become a force of nature, but Danielle just smiled. She wasn't a force, she was simply free. One day, a little over 2 years after the wedding, Jason found himself in an unexpected situation. His company was hosting a charity gala, an event he normally would have dreaded. But this time, he wasn't the center of attention. The focus was on the causes, the people who benefited, and the difference they were making. It was the kind of event Danielle would have loved. As he scanned the room, his heart skipped a beat. There she was, Danielle. She was speaking to a small group of women, her voice warm, her smile radiant. She looked happy, genuinely happy. Marcus wasn't by her side this time, but Jason noticed a simple diamond ring on her left hand. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, but it wasn't jealousy, it was acceptance. Before he could stop himself, Jason approached her. She noticed him immediately, her smile softening but not fading. "Jason," she said, her tone neutral but kind. "Danielle," he replied, suddenly unsure of what to say. "It's good to see you. You too," she said, her gaze steady. "You look well." Jason nodded. "Thanks. I've been trying." Her expression softened further, as if she understood more than he could put into words. "I can see that." There was a brief, awkward silence before Jason finally spoke again. "I just wanted to say thank you for the note you sent. It helped me more than I can explain." Danielle's smile grew a little wider. "I'm glad to hear that. Everyone deserves a chance to figure out who they are." Jason hesitated, then nodded. "You were right about everything. I spent so much time chasing things that didn't matter. And in the process, I lost the things that did. Danielle tilted her head slightly, her gaze filled with something that wasn't pity, but understanding. It's never too late to figure it out, Jason. He took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over him. Thank you, he said again, this time with more sincerity. I'm glad you're happy. You deserve it. Danielle's eyes softened, and she gave him a small nod. So do you. And with that, she excused herself, moving back toward her group. Jason watched her go, a strange mix of emotions swirling in his chest. But this time, regret wasn't one of them. For the first time, he felt peace not because he had won her back, but because he had finally learned to let go. That night, as Jason walked back to his car, he thought about the path ahead. It was still uncertain, still daunting, but he no longer felt like he had to run from his past or prove himself to the world. He had spent too long trying to be someone else. Now, he was ready to figure out who Jason Freeman really was. And though the road would be long, he was finally ready to take the first real step. Jason stepped into his car and sat quietly for a moment, the city lights flickering around him. His meeting with Danielle at the gala played over in his mind, not with the bitterness or self-pity that had once consumed him, but with a surprising sense of clarity. For years, he had been chasing a version of success that left no room for true happiness. Tonight, he realized that his story didn't have to end in regret. The next day, Jason made a decision that would shock his board of directors. He resigned as CEO of Freeman and Grant Investments. Are you sure about this? His closest friend and COO Nathan asked, his voice laced with disbelief as they stood in Jason's office, the desk already cleared of most of his belongings. Yes, Jason said firmly, for the first time in a long time, feeling no hesitation. I've spent years building something that doesn't even reflect who I am anymore. I want to do something that actually matters. Nathan looked skeptical. And what's next? Jason leaned back against the desk, a faint smile on his face. I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Over the following months, Jason threw himself into learning and self-discovery. He spent time volunteering with community organizations, something he had never made time for before. He met people who weren't impressed by his title or his bank account, people who valued him for his willingness to listen, to learn, and to contribute. He reconnected with his parents, who had long since resigned themselves to being little more than footnotes in their son's life. Jason realized how much he had missed, how much they had quietly supported him despite his distance. It wasn't easy to rebuild those bonds, but he was determined to try. For the first time, Jason wasn't chasing accolades or recognition. He was chasing something simpler, yet infinitely more fulfilling. Purpose. Meanwhile, Danielle's life continued to flourish. Her nonprofit had grown rapidly, gaining national attention for its innovative programs and success stories. She and Marcus married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and admiration, and their love was a testament to the strength they had both found in themselves and each other. One day, as Danielle was preparing for a keynote speech at a major business summit, she received an email that gave her pause. Subject: Thank you from Jason Freeman. Danielle, I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to share something with you because, in many ways, you're the reason it happened. After years of building a life that wasn't really mine, I finally had the courage to walk away. I've stepped down as CEO, and I'm now working on a community development project that focuses on empowering young entrepreneurs from underserved backgrounds. It's still in its early stages, but for the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know. Your words, your grace, and the life you've built for yourself have inspired me in ways I can't fully express. Thank you for being the person who showed me there's more to life than success as the world defines it. I wish you and Marcus all the happiness in the world. You both deserve it. Take care. Jazz. Danielle read the email twice, her emotions a mixture of surprise and quiet pride. She thought about everything they had been through, the pain and heartbreak, the lessons and growth. She smiled softly, knowing that Jason's journey was finally leading him to where he needed to be. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Jason's message wasn't a cry for forgiveness or a plea for attention, it was a declaration of his own transformation. And for that, she was grateful. Years later, their paths crossed one last time. Danielle was attending a panel discussion at a leadership conference, and one of the speakers was none other than Jason Freeman. He spoke passionately about his work mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing stories of resilience and innovation that moved the audience to a standing ovation. As the panel ended, Jason spotted Danielle in the crowd. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small, genuine smile. Danielle nodded in return, her expression warm. No words were exchanged, they didn't need to be. Jason had finally found his place in the world, and Danielle had long since found hers. Their stories were no longer entangled in regret or what-ifs. They were separate, but stronger for the paths they had taken. And as they went their separate ways that day, both of them knew that sometimes the most unexpected chapters of life lead to the most meaningful endings.